that and go back to here. Okay, go ahead, Bruce, and let everybody in. Thank you.
Here they come.
Okay, looks good. We'll keep admitting people as they come in. Welcome, everybody. My name is Holly Hibner. I'm the Adult Services Coordinator at the Plymouth District Library. This session is being recorded and streamed live on Facebook, so the video will be available on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel for the next week or so. First and foremost, I always want to thank the Friends of the Library for sponsoring this event. Next, I want to encourage you to use the chat feature in Zoom or the comment area in Facebook throughout tonight's presentation. You can ask questions of the presenter, and then I will relay them to her to answer at the end of the program. If you experience any technical difficulties, Bruce is with us tonight. He's a technology assistant at the library, and he can help you out in the Zoom chat box as well. So thank you for that, Bruce. For the best viewing experience, I always like to suggest that you put Zoom in speaker view. And in your video settings, if you hide all non-video participants, that way you'll see the presenter and her slides, and that's it. And then before I introduce our presenter, I just want to give a shameless plug to some of our other library programs coming up, also sponsored by the Friends of the Library. Tomorrow night, October 8th at 7 p.m. on Zoom, Joe Oldenburg will present a history of the Detroit House of Corrections, DeHoco. That's tomorrow night at 7. You can register at plymouthlibrary.org under events, and then you will get an email confirmation that includes the Zoom login information. Next week on the 20th, actually, I guess that's maybe more like 2 weeks. We have In-Home Pet Services are presenting Pet First Aid, 7 o'clock p.m. on the 20th. And then on the 22nd, we have a Zoom presentation about the orphan train era. That should be a great one too. So now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Mariya Fogarasi. Mariya has spent most of her life overseas and enjoys sharing her experiences through lively PowerPoint presentations in local libraries. Mariya has lived in Germany on 4 different occasions for a total of 29 years. You know what? I'm reading your Berlin intro. For whatever reason, I don't have the Korea one you sent me right in front of me. Shoot.
I'm good. It's fine. It's
okay.
Fine.
Well, she lived in Germany on 4 occasions for a total of 29 years. She has served on the board of the Berlin Historical Association. I'll let you fill in the Korea details. After living in 5 countries for a total of 44 years, she returned to her native Michigan in 2016, currently substitute teaches, writes, and continues to travel. So thank you very much. It's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Holly. I appreciate it. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, signing up, and being eager to learn about Korea, one of the, quote, lesser known Asian countries when it comes to travel from the United States, but still very significant in many ways, as you're going to find out. My husband, I am married to a man who was a Foreign Service employee, but not with the State Department, it was with the Commerce Department. So in other words, there are embassies that have all different kinds of departments, Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce. We only usually hear about State Department. And in 2006, we were sent from Berlin to Seoul, Korea. We were there for 4 years. And interestingly enough, we went right back to Berlin in 2010. So even more interesting, we went from a city and country that had been divided to a country that is still divided today. So welcome to my program about Korea. I always start out with a little bit of geography, but before I do that, I want to present the flag, which is called the Taegeuk, translated to mean the supreme ultimate flag. It's a great show of patriotism. And the flag has a white background. That's the traditional color of peace and purity. The red-blue ensemble in the middle is a kind of a yin-yang, the red being the positive cosmic forces of the universe, the blue being the negative. And then the trigrams are the black stripes, and they stand for many different principles of peace and harmony. So that is the Taegeuk. And I took my title, Land of the Morning Calm, from a nickname that Korea has. And there are two ways that it got, actually, two ways that it got this nickname. First of all, there was a painter working in Korea in 1895. Here he would have been painting away. He was British. His name was Henry Savage Landor. And he wrote a book called Korea and the Chosen Dynasty, the Land of the Morning Calm. So here he is painting these beautiful landscapes, but he did not refer to Korea and the Land of the Morning Calm in a positive light, because the Chosen Dynasty, which was waning in the years when he was there, had ruled from 1392 to 1895. That's a long stretch. But during his time, it had become lethargic, it had been corrupt. So when he said morning calm, he meant it in a negative light. However, the second reason why the Korea, it said it has this nickname, comes from an emperor of the Ming Dynasty, the Celestial Empire of the East, who chose to say that, use the word Chaosian to describe Korea, the breathtaking scenery, the high mountains, the clear, tranquil waters, and the overall just spectacular natural beauty, especially in the morning. So the title, The Land of the Morning Calm, the nickname stuck. That's where that comes from. So if I were standing in front of you right now, so I'm looking a little bit rumpled in my hanbok there, it was at the end of a show, but this is what I would look like. I would be wearing a hanbok, which is the traditional dress in Korea, but not at all what you would see right now. Korea is an extremely modern country, tech savvy, most internet wired country in the world, upscale, but this would be the dress of olden days, made of silk. And I was very fortunate to have this made for me. Our US Embassy was involved in an event where the ambassadors were invited to a talent show. Our ambassador and his wife could not attend that night, so I was fortunate enough to take their place. And so my hanbok reflected the colors of the United States, red, white, and blue. And I've kept it ever since then. My contribution on that evening was to stand on the stage and recite the Emma Lazarus poem from the Statue of Liberty about welcoming immigrants to the shore. So this is what I would be looking like if we were all together, which maybe will happen again someday. I like to start out, again, I had said, with some geography. This is practically the entire world except for the West. And I'm going up here to China. Up here, I'm in the upper right of the screen, where you can see China and you can see the Korean peninsula coming down off of China. There's a tiny, tiny bit of Russia that borders what is now North Korea. There's also very, very close proximity to the country of Japan. Where's my pointer here? There. So this is the Korean peninsula right now in its divided state. Let's go back just a little bit in time to 1945. It's the end of World War II. Germany has surrendered. The Pacific fighting is still going on, but the collapse of Japan is imminent. Korea became a Japanese colony in 1910, and so the United States had to figure out what was going to happen. Well, we were very concerned. We were not on Korea. Our closest forces were on Okinawa, about 600 miles away, but the Russians were very close. And we were very much afraid that the Russians might try to take over the whole peninsula when Japan collapsed. And we wanted to have a foothold on this peninsula. We had been allied with Russia during World War II, as we know, but the Potsdam conferences, Harry Truman, Joseph Stalin in the summer of '45 had already indicated that things were not going to be easy, and we probably weren't going to be sharing the same philosophy from then on. So the US was tasked with making a proposal to the Russians. No one had ever thought of dividing the Korean peninsula. It had really enjoyed a high degree of continuity for over a millennium, but something had to be done. So two colonels were tasked with this job. Their names were US Colonels Charles Bonesteel and Dean Rusk. Dean Rusk, you probably may know, went on to become the Secretary of State for President John F. Kennedy. And they wanted to follow provincial boundaries when they proposed a division. They also wanted to make sure that the capital, which is right here, was in the sector over which the United States had some control. But they couldn't find a map that showed the geographical boundaries, so they arbitrarily proposed the 38th parallel. And to their amazement, the Russians said yes right away. No questions, no negotiations. They just said yes. So this is the border at the end from the end of World War II until the fighting broke out when the Korean War began. So this is where the phrase, the famous 38th parallel, comes from. When the Korean War broke out on June the 25th, 1950, and the North invaded the South. Oh, I have to go back to 1945 and say this would be a sign that would have been put up along the 38th parallel out in the countryside, just arbitrarily somewhere in the countryside. So on the left, you've got, and this is a picture of a picture that I found in a museum. So the quality is a little bit, but you get the idea. So on the left, you've got the Cyrillic, the Russian, stating this is the 38th parallel. This is going to be North Korea. And on the right, you've got the US zone, the 38th latitude parallel, South Korea. And here, again, the picture of the picture in the museum, the citizens out in the countryside trying to imagine what this must be, what this would mean for their country, this split, this division that no one had ever considered. On June 25th, 1950, the North, backed up by China, did invade the South. They were able to take Seoul, and they were able to push all the way down almost to the second largest city of Busan, or Busan. Sometimes in English we see it spelled with a B or a P. And to make a long story short, we successfully pushed back a couple of months later, but the sad fighting continued for 3 more years. And this is the armistice line that resulted in 1953 when the fighting stopped. The armistice line, you can see, is not quite exactly on the 38th parallel anymore, but everybody still calls it the 38th parallel. It tilts a little bit to the north on the right-hand side, and there's about 56% of the land that's in North Korea, and the rest is in South Korea. The capital of North Korea is Pyongyang, right here. Seoul, I had said beforehand, is the capital of South Korea, and this is a peace village here, which you'll hear about in a minute. I want to draw your attention over here. This is a disputed body of water. Korea calls it the East Sea. Japan calls it the Sea of Japan. It's extremely contentious. Unfortunately, there isn't, I would say, the best of relations between the two countries. And you have to be really careful about putting that on a map. I have a friend, he's since left, but last year he was still running the German school in Seoul, and he had someone redo the map on his website and didn't really have it at the forefront of his mind, and had a call from the Ministry of Education because this body of water was labeled the Sea of Japan, and they said, you had better change that immediately. So this is what Korea looks like now. This is what it was like when the fighting stopped. There is an armistice in place. There was never a peace treaty signed because South Korea did not accept the division of the peninsula. Again, everybody always thought it would only be temporary. And this is what Korea looks like today. This is a quick tribute to our men and women who fought in the Korean War. Some people call it the Forgotten War in the United States. This is our monument in Washington, D.C., where we have the monuments for the different wars. And the quote is, and they're very, you can see the winters were very, very bitterly cold. They've got these heavy coats on. Our nation honors her sons and daughters who answered the call to defend a country they never knew and a people they never met. So we had about 37,000 troops die in the Korean War, about 1 million South Korean citizens. And we have over 5,000 still missing in action. When there was the first meeting between President Trump and the dictator of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, there were remains of some soldiers returned. But then when the second meeting, and continuous meetings fell apart, North Korea said that they were not interested in trying to help us on that score anymore. But a tribute again to the men and women who fought on that peninsula. This is another map, again, showing that the border is not at the 38th parallel anymore. Just a couple of things I want to, okay, now here I should have really, but it wasn't easy to find the East Sea. It should only say the East Sea on my map here. Seoul, again, Incheon, the major airport, the international airport, we will be landing there in a few minutes on our trip. And up here, the capital, Pyongyang. Over here, Pyeongchang, the site of the 2018 Winter Olympics. So when the decision was being made as to where these Olympics should be held, the two finalists were Munich, Germany, and Pyeongchang in South Korea. And interestingly enough, each was represented by a former ice skating champion. I don't know if some of you might remember back to the East Germany years in the Olympics, there was a young skater named Katharina Witt who did very well with her medal count. And she represented Munich. And South Korea had a skater, Kim Yuna, who skated in Vancouver in 2010, who won, I believe, 7 gold medals. So they were each the face of their city advocating for these games. And Pyeongchang won. At the time, there were some jokes saying, oh, you know, Americans will mix up Pyeongchang and Pyongyang. They do sound similar. But anyway, a tribute to South Korea for hosting those games successfully. And by the way, I should have said at the beginning, and you may have gathered by now, that my talk is about South Korea or the Republic of Korea. Every once in a while, I get the question as to whether or not I lived in the North or South. US citizens are not permitted to live in the North. It is very, very, very heavily recommended by the State Department that we don't even travel there. We have no diplomatic representation if anything goes wrong, and things can go wrong. If you remember in the last 1 or 2 years, this tragic case of the University of Virginia student Otto Warmbier. So my talk is about, I will only say Korea from now on, but I am referring to the South. And again, the second largest city of Busan, you saw it before spelled with a P. Here it's a P. Here you can see the proximity to Japan, and down here a volcanic island. This was a tragic ferry sinking that just happens to be on the map, but I liked the way it was portrayed, so I chose to put this into my show. And I gave a salute to the armed forces who fought in the war, and I have to give a salute to the ones who are there now. We have about almost 25,000 troops on the peninsula. We have everything. We have the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. My family and I lived on an Army garrison, which now has ceased to exist. U.S. Army Garrison Yongsan meaning Dragon Mountain. It was right in the middle of Seoul. More about that in a few minutes. And it took about 12 years to complete the move, but the entire Army post has been moved 3 hours south, where you see Camp Humphreys down here. So this one has grown exponentially. You can't really have an Army post in the middle of a capital city, because if you need to maneuver, you're obviously handicapped. But that's the way it was for a long time. So these forces are responsible for maintaining peace and prosperity, well, not prosperity, but peace on the peninsula. And they work hand in hand very well with the Korean forces, and in general stability in that region of Asia, the Asia Pacific. Our forces also handle non-combatant evacuation exercises, meaning if you're registered with the US Embassy, you're a US citizen, or there are a number of other countries that qualify. And there were, for some reason, something where you had to leave the peninsula right away, the armed forces would assist in gathering everybody together and going. And I have to say that even though you're always hearing, or we do hear a fair bit about, North Korea and the rockets in the news, living in Seoul is actually, in Korea is actually, it's a very safe country in which to live. In fact, we on the Army post in the middle of Seoul, it was like 1950s Seoul as far as letting young children run around. You really never had to worry about where they were. And but anyway, the point is that if you're in a country where such a thing could happen, you are advised to keep certain papers together, your passports, your vaccination records. If you have, prescription medication, if you have pets, you want to have their vaccination books ready to go. And not that you're living on the edge of the sword, that's not the case at all. But you need to know that those things are all together if you want to leave. So a salute to the US Armed Forces that are on the peninsula now. So when I talked about the fact that the fighting stopped in 1953, and I said that there was an armistice, and this is the way Korea was divided, it wasn't just a single line, because each side pulled their troops back about 2 kilometers. So what you actually have is a block of land, and it's the famous DMZ, or demilitarized zone, which is today heavily mined. At the beginning, it wasn't the case, but it's become more fortified over the years. So it's a block of land that's 160 miles wide and long and 4 kilometers wide. It has been suggested by some that if the two Koreas, regardless of whether or not they ever unite, even if North Korea were free and they were living in harmony side by side, that you could have this area be a national park, because there are flora and fauna examples in it that haven't been seen anywhere else on the peninsula for over 50 years now. So it's just popularly called the DMZ. There's a lot that goes on at the DMZ that we never ever hear about. First of all, this is the North Korean side. There's a village on the South Korean side that I'm not showing, where the citizens are rewarded for their proximity to the border. They don't have to pay taxes. The young men don't serve in the military. In Korea, all young men serve 2 years in the military. And interestingly enough, on the northern side, there is also this village, which has these attractive blue roofs, and which is actually built way back when they were trying to lure South Korean defectors over to the north. But if you look at these buildings with a high-powered telescope, you find out that they're all empty. It's only a sham. There's nobody in them. There is a skeleton crew that sweeps the streets to make it look like something's going on, but this is a fake village on the side of North Korea. Secondly, sometime in the 70s or 80s, South Korea erected a very tall flagpole, 323 feet. North Korea responded with this flagpole, 525 feet. They wanted, of course, to be better and taller, and this is their flag that you see right there. There are also balloon warfare, where there are pamphlets flown. Now, this wouldn't be a government action on the part of South Korea, but activist groups will send pamphlets over the DMZ in the hopes of, getting some literature into the north. As recently as June of this year, actually, there was an article I found in the paper about South Korea said they have to punish these activists who are doing this because North Korea was threatening retaliation. So this has gone on and off ever since the DMZ was created. There are also loudspeaker wars with slogans being shouted back and forth across the DMZ. So because there aren't many citizens living in the proximity, usually it's just soldiers who hear these. So the other thing that goes on at the DMZ, this is really interesting. There have been 4 tunnels that have been dug underneath the DMZ from North Korea, all in the direction of Seoul, all with the intent of planning an invasion. Thankfully, none of them ever succeeded. None of them made it all the way. The first one was discovered in the 70s, and North Korea said, well, they were mining for coal, but upon closer inspection of the tunnel, and they had even painted the walls black, but there was no coal down there. Each tunnel became successively more sophisticated. I think the last one is slanting upwards for water runoff. And here you have some pictures of this. So again, none of them ever succeeded, but clearly designed for an invasion of Seoul, of the capital city. Tours to the DMZ are very popular, also from the civilian population. And if you take a tour, you get a hard hat and you can go partway down, not super far, but you can go 100 or 200 feet down into the tunnel just to experience and to see the size and the width. The other thing that North Korea is well known for is hacking into the Bitcoin currency markets in South Korea, and they're also very good at counterfeiting dollar bills. They used to do a great $1 bill, and then they were making a 100 US dollar bill. I think that might have stopped in 2013 because we had that new $100 bill come out with the big picture of Benjamin Franklin. It was called a super dollar because when they were doing it, it was deemed to be even better than the original. But I think that has stopped. But anyway, there are so many things that are happening that the outside world doesn't always hear about at the DMZ. This is one thing that we did hear about. This was a really sad occurrence right before we left in March 2010. This is a South Korean battleship, the Chonan, and they were out on a routine naval exercise. They were near North Korean waters on the west, off the west coast, but they were not in North Korean waters, and it was sunk by a torpedo, and 42 sailors unfortunately died. They perished in this accident. So afterwards, it was very closely examined, not only by the United States and Korea, but by a consortium of countries, and it was deemed that it was 100% a North Korean torpedo that sank this battleship. Here you have over on the right in the black suit, you have the president of Korea, South Korea at that time, Lee Myung-bak, paying tribute. And if you can tell, each one has the face of one of the sailors here, and he's paying tribute to the sailors. And the headline of this was the stars of, this was, by the way, the Korean English newspaper that we would get, the daily. And at the bottom, you see it says Navy Chief vows revenge for Chonan, but there's not really very much South Korea can do when something like this happens other than advocate for stronger sanctions. They certainly don't want conflict with the North. So this was a very, very sad occurrence. So this is the DMZ. This is Panmunjom. Right at the beginning, I had said there was that other tiny village starting with a P. It's not even a village. This is at the DMZ. This is, you're standing in South Korea. These are South Korean guards looking over to the north. And these buildings would be, if there were ever to be peace negotiations, where they would take place. This is inside. This is part of the DMZ tour, if you so choose to go on it. And you can see the American GI over here answering some questions from the tourists. And this is another picture of the inside. These would be South Korean guards inside. Sure, they're South Korean and they're our allies, but you are told not to go anywhere near them. Don't try to get up next to them for a picture. Don't try to shake their hands. They're there to, they mean business, and then they are there to protect, and they're not to be taken lightly. So we do have a couple of troops up, not a couple of, but we have some American troops up at the DMZ. That would be what you call an unaccompanied post, meaning your family, if you have a family, would not be with you just because of the danger. And there is a small golf course here for recreation for the soldiers. You can see this out of the bus window on your tour. DMZ, this Panmunjom, is also known as the Joint Security Area. So here, as featured in Sports Illustrated, I would like to present the world's most dangerous golf course. It's a par 3 and 192 yards. And at the bottom, you can read danger. Do not retrieve the balls from the rough live minefields, because the area is heavily mined. So that is the world's most dangerous golf course. So when I gave this talk back in February, I was told or asked by someone in the audience, did you see Final Jeopardy last night? And to make a long story short, the question had been, the category had been Asian geography. And I added this to my slideshow because this is exactly what you've just learned. This 150 by 2.5 mile area created in 1953 is now home to more than 100 endangered protected species. And the answer is, if you were playing Jeopardy now and you saw my show, you would be able to say the Korean Demilitarized Zone. I think 1 out of 3 of the contestants got it right on that night. So here's your Jeopardy question for the night. So I had said that just west of Seoul on the coast, there is a town called Incheon, and Incheon is where Korea's major international airport is located. It's a pretty snazzy airport. I think you can tell just by this picture. It ranks consistently in the world's top rankings of airports. When I looked them up, I found out that actually there's an airport in Singapore, Changi, that for the last 7 or 8 years has consistently ranked #1. They have 2 24-hour movie theaters and a rooftop swimming pool. However, the one in Seoul and in Tokyo, Japan, so Seoul's being Incheon and Tokyo's being Narita, do pretty well themselves. I think 2 years ago, this one, Incheon, was #3 and #2, and Narita was #3. And then the following year, they changed positions. So Incheon is a pretty sophisticated airport, but Incheon did not always look like this. I had said that the invasion for the Korean War came on June 25th, 1950. And the forces were very successful in taking Seoul and pushing our troops down to the south. Then on September 15th, we launched an amphibious assault. This is off the port of Incheon there. It was named Operation Chromite. It had 261 vessels and 75,000 troops and 16 countries led by the United States. And we had our leader, General Douglas MacArthur. There you see him with his field glasses. And this was a tremendous success. And with that, we were able, this consortium of 16 countries, to which Korea consistently pays its thanks because they were the 16 who supported it in the war. We were able to retake the capital. And, and like I said at the beginning, sadly, the war dragged on for 3 more years. So this is the Incheon landing. But we're going in now to Korea, and I am going to, and I do want to tell you here that in 2009, when we were there, Korea recreated, now obviously not with 75,000 troops and 261 vessels, but they did a semi show of the Incheon landing, again, thanking these 16 countries, but also a show of force to the north to say, look what we have, we're alert, we do this kind of thing, you'd better watch out. So September 15th is not a holiday, but it is always acknowledged in Korea. And this would be the 4th terminal of Incheon Airport. The 4th terminal would have been finished just in time to start the 2018 Winter Olympic Games. So we've taken the bus into town, or you can take a taxi, which is a lot more expensive, and the bus is just as good. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce Seoul, Korea to you. Here you're standing looking from the south to the north. You're looking over the Han River. Korea, Seoul has 10 million inhabitants, but Greater Metropolitan Seoul has 25 million inhabitants. In a city of 50 million, Greater Metropolitan Seoul has 50% of the population. This part closest to me, to us, the South, was all rice fields in the 1980s. Korea had an absolutely remarkable growth spurt and is now the world's 13th largest economy. This country that's the size of Indiana with 50 million people. This is frequently referred to, that is the Han River there. So it's referred to as the miracle on the Han, this rapid and very successful economic growth, or sometimes also Korea's Cinderella story. Again, as I said at the beginning, it's affluent, it's fluent, it's internet wired. The average per capita income in the 60s was about $100, and it's now about $19,000 or $20,000. This is a tribute to my army post where I lived on Yongsan Garrison, which I had said they moved it. It took 12 years to move, but they moved it 3 hours south. Why would you ever have an army post in the middle of the capital city? Again, we're reeling back the years to 1880. This had been a Chinese army outpost. Seoul was nowhere near as large as it is now. Then in 1910, Japan annexed Korea, and it became a Japanese army post. You can still see the cherry trees that bloom in the spring along the parade route. And then in 1945, with the collapse of Japan, it became a US Army post. So our embassy, it was a little bit of an unusual situation. Everyone in our embassy, except for the ambassador and the number 2, who's always referred to as the deputy chief of mission, we all lived on this army post. And so we lived between 2 completely different worlds. You can see how serene and pastoral this is. And we've got this city of 10 million, 25 million people all around us. We've got our golf driving range there. We've got, we've got the military police with 30 miles an hour and very, I mean, we're not crawling, but very, not fast traffic. And you've got a teeming world outside your gates. So it was quite a fascinating contrast. This would have been one of the gates that we would have driven through. So we come from a city that has 8 lanes of traffic going through the middle of it. Again, we go from a place where we're paying in won, WON, that's the Korean currency, to paying in US dollars. So it was an interesting contrast. And this is, by the way, would have been the gates where when the COVID crisis started in March, immediately the temperature checks would have started at these gates coming onto the army post. And my talk isn't necessarily political, but when we were there, President Barack Obama was in office, and I just wanted to show that we get VIPs coming to any army post or any embassy in the world. It's always a very high honor to have someone come, be it the president, whoever he or she would be, Secretary of State. It could be anyone for the army. It could be a high-ranking general. And then there's usually a meet and greet done. Here he is greeting the men and women of Yongsan Army Garrison. And then our embassy meet and greet would have been a separate occasion there. So, but we're going to take a tour now. We're going to go on a tour of Seoul, and we're going to take this bus, the Seoul City Bus Tour. If you've traveled, you've probably seen these buses in different cities. You can usually buy a ticket for 12 or 24 hours, and it's called a hop on, hop off again bus, because if you see something that intrigues you, you can get off and visit it and then get right back on with your ticket and keep on going. And this particular bus had headphones with 12 different languages to point out the highlights that you're looking at. And we're headed for this building right back here, which is right in the middle of Seoul and which is National Treasure #1. So you can define a national treasure. It has to be something tangible, and it can be a building, a site, a treasure, or an artifact, and it has to have exceptional cultural or historic or architectural value. When the Japanese annexed Korea in 1910, they numbered the national treasures. I have to also tell you that it was a very cruel annexation when Japan annexed Korea in 1910. There was environmental and economic exploitation of the peninsula, meaning anything that was made first went over to Japan and Korea got what was left over. There was suppression of culture and the language, and it was a very, very difficult time for Korea. But the Japanese in 1938 decided to number their national treasures. So they probably wanted to take inventory of what they had on the peninsula. So this is national treasure #1. By the way, I looked and there are about 319 national treasures listed to date. This is Namdaemun Gate, or Sung-won, meaning the Great South Gate, or also known as Sungye-mun, the Gate of Exalted Ceremonies. And it would have been one of the gates back when the Chosun dynasty was created in 1392, so built in the early 1400s. It would have been one of the gates it was one of 8 gates surrounding the capital city of Seoul. The walls would have been about 20 feet high, and the wall was probably about 11 miles long. But this was one of 3 very special gates. Remember, Gate of Exalted Ceremonies. So this gate would have been used, all of the gates would have been used to control access to the capital city area. Secondly, they would have greeted VIP visitors here. And thirdly, they would have kept out Siberian white tigers. There are no more Siberian white tigers on the peninsula today. Around 1900, they started taking down the walls around the gate just because the city was growing and they didn't really need the wall anymore. And then after the annexation with Japan, when the crown prince visited, he had the walls taken down completely because he deemed himself too exalted to pass through the gate. So it was a slap in the face for the Korean people. But this beautiful gate, again, is the typical pagoda style. The bottom is stonework, the top is wood, this 2-tiered pagoda style. And up until 2008, it was the oldest wooden building in Seoul. I like this picture here. You can see it in the middle because you can watch all that traffic streaming around it at night and the beautiful way that it's illuminated. When I learned to drive in Seoul, I learned with a friend of mine, and she said, always stay in the middle lane so you don't get shot off somewhere. So I followed her advice. And I've lived in 2 cities around the world where I never could find any street signs. So I drove by landmarks. The GPS was really just kind of coming into being. We didn't have the GPS. And so I drove by landmarks. So this is Namdaemun Gate at night. Here it is again in the daytime, again looking very handsome. This would be rolling back the clock to 1950. Again, Korean War hadn't happened yet. US Navy must have been patrolling in the area, and the USS Boxer stopped there, and the sailors must have come ashore and come into the city for some R&R. But look at 1950s Korea here. Look at the dress of the woman. Look at the mode of transportation, the bicycle or the cart being drawn by the ox here. It's very, very different from a street scene that you would have seen in the United States in 1950. And then in 2008, remember I said it was up until 2008, the oldest wooden structure in the city of Seoul. So disaster struck because a fire broke out and the roof was heavily damaged. The firefighters put it out as best they could, thought they had extinguished it, went home. It broke out again and the entire roof collapsed. to make it worse, it was discovered that it was arson. It was a gentleman in his, well, I can't even call him gentleman. It was a man in his 60s who apparently was disgruntled. He had sold some land and felt that the price he had received was unfair. Perhaps it was a forced sale by the government. I don't know. But at any rate, he committed arson. And again, going back to what I said about Korea and Seoul being a safe society, I don't think anybody ever dreamed that they needed to have security around National Treasure #1. Well, they certainly do now. And it's been rebuilt as of 2013. It's back to its old glory. But this was a really heavy, heavy blow for the Korean people. So this is National Treasure #1. This is Namdaemun Gate. And right next to Namdaemun Gate, you have a market, which would have started back in the 1400s as a government managed marketplace, probably requiring the people to bring tributes of rice or cloth or money. And then slowly but surely, the trading booths sprang up. There would be fish, there would be fruits, there would be all kinds of things, until what it is now, one of these teeming Asian markets that never ever seems to sleep. I think it does close around 10 or 11 at night, but it reopens at 3 or 4 in the morning. So literally going all the time. And this middle section here, this street, you can have deliveries, but it's basically a pedestrian zone. And here you can see it decked out for, it looks like there might be some kind of festival there, strolling down the street. And then all these shops, many of them selling the same things. You wonder how they all stay in business. So this particular one has souvenir wallets. And this one obviously has just tons of hats, and then shoes, and it goes on forever. This is a souvenir shop. We'll talk about the wooden masks later on that you see there. And then there are some dolls off to the right, and just another street scene there, very crowded, very popular. And then the food stalls here, over here, you can either get a meal prepared for you and eat it there, or here, for instance, or you can buy something and take it home. And then when you get it prepared for you, you get you get metal chopsticks, which I find particularly difficult because I think the noodles slide right off of them. And you are welcome to ask for a spoon if you need help. And again, just the vast array of choices, and you've got to be very adventuresome. We'll talk about food more in a little while. So this is the marketplace. And this is, I had to borrow this image from the internet. I appreciate it, Getty. I wanted to show you this main thoroughfare here. The market would be off to the left. We have, I don't know if you can see, there's a tiny American flag right there. This is our US Embassy. And there's some kind of festival going on here on the boulevard. But what I want you to look at back here is this palace, because the Chosun dynasty had 5 palaces. This was the largest of the palaces. Gyeongbokgung, literally translated to mean palace greatly blessed by heaven. However, history, I don't know whether that name is appropriate looking back, because the palace would have been built in the early 1400s. In the 1500s, it was destroyed by the Japanese in an invasion, and it lay in ashes for 300 years. Then it was rebuilt. But then when Japan annexed Korea in 1910, there are about 410 buildings, different buildings in that palace complex, and 400 of them were destroyed on the pretext that there was going to be an exhibition, which was never held. So Gyeongbokgung Palace up here. And in front of the palace, there is a gate, again, that 2-tiered pagoda style. The name of the gate is Gwanghwamun, and this word expressed all the hopes and dreams of the Chosun dynasty, very young, going forward, literally meaning, may the light of enlightenment blanket the world, Gwanghwamun. And this little guy here is a Haiti. He's a fire-breathing dragon. He's mythical. He's supposed to also protect the palace from fire. And there's another one over on the other side. So this picture does not exist anymore in Korea. But if you take down this gate, Gwanghwamun, I want you to look back at this colonial style building. When Japan annexed Korea, they built this building. They referred to Seoul as Kaito, and this was the Governor General building from where they ruled the peninsula. This was also, I told you, they took down 400 buildings of the palace, and they took down Gwanghwamun. With time passed, Korea became modern, and so Gwanghwamun was rebuilt, and then there was a great discussion about this building. In 1945, this would have been where the US received the surrender of Japan on the steps of this building. Then it was used as the National Assembly. It was used as the National Museum. But with time, the Koreans would discuss and they would say, do we really want that building there? So some people would say, yes, we're a modern country now. So what if the Japanese built it? Just let it go. But others were very adamant that it should be torn down, especially because it was in front of their palace. And that side won. So in 1995, that would be the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II. On August 15th, which is Korea's Liberation Day, the demolition of this building started. So this building no longer exists. You can see a model in a museum, but it's no longer there. There were some other buildings. For instance, here, this is just a short distance away. This is City Hall. This was also built during the Japanese occupation, but this was not quite as offensive. So this building is still standing. And since I lived there, they've got these beautiful fountains. And like also you see a lot of big cities around the world now, they'll have these big letters where the tourists can fit through the letters and have their picture taken. And so City Hall here for Seoul. And going further, we're going into the palace grounds now. We've passed through Gwanghwamun, but we're diverting again back up to look at this mountain here. The name of this mountain is Bukhansan, san meaning mountain, and this is part of a national park. Bukhansan became Korea's 15th national park in 1983, and 50% of this park is within the limits of the city of Seoul. Can you imagine? Look at this, pretty dramatic here. I'm not sure I'd quite ever get that high, but you can see some of Korea's natural beauty shining through there. So 50% of it, that means half of the subway stops to access this park are within the city limits, making it one of the most visited national parks in the world. They get approximately 5 million visitors per year. Koreans are very big hikers. There's also a lot of bird watching in this park. It's very popular. Korea, like North America, gets this absolutely gorgeous flaming red, this burgundy color in the fall, very, very picturesque. And again, this is all just a heartbeat away from this is the capital city. And here you see hikers, they have had to close off some of the paths on the weekends just because of overuse, just the tremendous number of people. So this would be Bukhansan National Park. Going back into the palace, I was thinking European palace, one big building, with velvet carpets and many different rooms, but it's not like that at all. Here you can see it at night and how many different buildings there are. I love this illuminated picture, and they're all 6 to 8 to 10 feet off of the ground because the heating would have come from underneath, and this would be leading into the palace here. And then going back up here, you would have the mountain that I just showed you. This would be a garden on the palace grounds, very, very peaceful. And this would be the throne room for the emperor. This would be his throne here. Again, everything raised up for under the floor heating. And you, by the way, we as tourists would not be walking in here. We would be standing looking into these areas here. So this is a pretty neat thing that also didn't exist when I was there. I had shown you my hanbok at the beginning of the show and said that it's really something of the olden days, but heavily used in the tourist industry. So somewhere between 2010 and 2019, Korea decided that renting hanboks to tourists would be a pretty neat thing. And on top of that, if you wear a hanbok, and there's also a traditional dress for men, that you get free entry to the palace. So these girls are tourists who've decided to rent for the day. And this would be a typical, you can see the dress for the men and the women and the prices that you'd have to pay. And then, for instance, this one says you get hair service, hairband, purse, underskirt, and a locker for your street clothes for free. And you can put on your hanbok and you can stroll around like, in the days of yore. And again, just another picture on the palace grounds of people walking around. Here's some really, really tired tourists who probably are trying to just decide what they're going to do next. And this is that leading away from the palace now up the hill. And this is a village which has been maintained. It's about 600 years old, thankfully, because most of these areas have been torn down. But this would have been a village, and you can see the beautiful rooftops that don't exist anywhere anymore. This would have been for the well-educated, for the aristocracy. And I like this. I'm sitting in a tea room here, and I'm looking out over the old roofs, over to the city. And in front, you see the kimchi jars. I'll be telling you, kimchi, you may know, is that fermented cabbage that you see in all Korean restaurants. And in the olden days, this would have been, the kimchi would have been placed in these jars and put down in the earth. That was the natural refrigeration for the cabbage as it fermented over the winter. So you've got these kimchi jars and the old and the new. And this Bukchon Hanok village is also very interesting to walk around, and you'll see a lot of tourists dressed up there again. And you can see just the touches on the roof and the tiles on the side, and really, really very, very pretty buildings. Here you can see an example of two of the doors on the side. It is an issue because people do live here, and it's become a point of contention. You will see these signs. This is a residential area, talk in whispers. And if you're not, someone may come up and tap you on the shoulder and remind you that people live here. So unfortunately, it's become so popular with tourists. I think it's not open to the public on Sunday anymore. And there have been some Korean soap operas that have done some filming there. So it does get quite a bit of traffic, but it is an opportunity to see the old buildings. So we're coming down now again. This is the mountain in the background. The palace would be over here and the Hanok village. And we're going to take a look at this statue of this gentleman, which is erected in 2009. His name is King Sejong. He lived in the 1300s, and he was a very benevolent king. He reinforced Confucian policies, and he executed major legal amendments. He also promoted scientific technologies, but what he's most well known for, so he was very good to his subjects, is this right down here. So up until then, Korea had used the Chinese alphabet, which was very complex. So he created Hangul, the Korean alphabet, which takes 28 figures in different 28 symbols in different configurations, and made it much more simple for his people. Here he is. This is maybe a better view because you can see this was erected in 2009 during the time that we lived there. So Hangul is a fairly easy alphabet to learn. Of course, aside from that, the Korean language is very tonal, but it has 8 basic letters that are used over and over again. And the quote is that someone, I think, what is the quote? My quote here. So a wise man can learn in a morning, a simpleton can learn in 10 days. So because the aristocracy and the educated people were the only ones who could read and write before King Sejong came along with this, they weren't really very happy, and they resisted it because they wanted to have the power. They wanted to be the ones who could read and write. But slowly and surely it became part of the population, and it stayed. And Korea honors its alphabet. Underneath this statue, there's a very small museum. And next to the Yongsan Army Garrison, where I showed you that I lived, this is about maybe 4 or 5 years old. There's an entire museum devoted to the Hangul language and many, many different aspects. Korea celebrates its Hangul. Actually, they're going to celebrate it on November the 9th, which is right around the corner. And as of 2014, October the 9th, excuse me. So October the 9th has been designated a national holiday. It's Hangul Day, and to honor King Sejong's accomplishments. I've been told that North Korea also celebrates the alphabet. It could be sometime in January. I'm not sure about that. So this is a picture depicting King Sejong and the dress that he and his advisors would have worn in the Chosen dynasty. He's conferring with them here. So a tribute to King Sejong. And then if we go a little bit further down that street, we come to a warrior who's up on top of a pedestal here, and he is a naval warrior. And I want you to pay attention to what's at the base, even though you don't know what it is yet. So this gentleman is Admiral Yi Sun-sin. He is another Korean hero. He lived in the 1500s, and he was so skilled at his naval battles against the Japanese. He never had any formal training, but he never lost a battle And he has been equated by some to be up there with Lord Horatio Nelson as one of the greatest naval commanders of all times. It's said that he would take exact inventory of what he had, and he studied the tides so that he knew when they would be to his advantage. And when he died in 1592 at the Battle of Norgin, he said something like, please continue to beat the drums. Do not announce my death. The battle is at its height, meaning continue on without me. But what he's most famous for is, this was at the base of that statue I showed you, and this is called a turtle ship, because everyone was fighting in those days with bows and arrows. So if you put a shell or a cover on the boat, then your sailors would be protected. And this went down in history. This is from a museum here, this particular picture. And so Admiral Yi Sun-sin is honored on one of the won. I had said the Korean currency is the won, W-O-N. So here he would be depicted. Here would be his turtle ship next to him. And here he would be also on the left conferring with his advisors. And then this would be a battle raging. You can see some of the arrows going through the air. And this is the turtle ship out here with its roof protecting the sailors. So you will see that when you're walking down the main drag. You might want to go to Namsan Mountain to see the new Seoul Tower. This is one of the second highest points in Seoul, and a very, very popular site, not only for tourists, but also for Koreans, because the little mountain is right in the middle of the city. This is well, it was built in 1971 as a radio and communications tower. This happens to be at cherry blossom time, but it's now also, you can go up there and there's a cafe, there's a souvenir shop, there is even a teddy bear museum since 2008. And basically you get a fabulous panorama all around looking out from this tower. Here it is illuminated at night, looking particularly attractive. And I want to show you just the proximity. So we have behind me here the statues of King Sejong and Yi Sun-sin, and you can see just how close Namsan is. Again, I said that people like to get out into the green. They like to get away from the concrete. They like to hike. And this is something that you might see when you're hiking up the mountain. These signposts are made out of wood. Here on the left, it's telling you how walking benefits many different parts of your body. And on the right, it's telling you the pressure points in the feet that we say they all relate to a different part of the body. So in other words, they're telling you that this is all very good for your health, what you're doing. And you may see a little like 8 or 10 pieces of exercise equipment at different points on the mountain where people will stop and do that. And anyway, Namsan and New Seoul Tower here. Where'd my arrow go? Oh, there's my arrow. Sorry about that. So another thing that New Seoul Tower has is locks of love. I think someone told me Rochester, Michigan has something like this somewhere. I'm not sure. But this is the railing on the tower where you can take a lock and you can swear eternal love and leave a message up there, the locks of love. Very popular also for the Koreans. And then this would be the Teddy Bear Museum. I took a scene where they're again in the garb of the Chosen Dynasty here and looking very adorable. And then here they are at a tea service, if you can just tell over here. And the tea service, and again, wearing the hanbok for the tourists. And the tea service is something that tourists like to watch. It's very, very, a very regulated tradition, very exact, how you pour, how you hold the cup, everything about it. So here in the Teddy Bear Museum, you have the tea service. You could go just out to the edge of Seoul to see the Korean folk village, which is like a Greenfield village or a Williamsburg kind of setting, where you would see the way people used to live and what they used to do. Two things you might see there. One would be these wooden totem poles called the jangsang. You would never see them clustered together like this, but they are for exhibit purposes. So the jangsang would stand at the edges of villages in the old days, and you see they all have those big ears, and they would listen listen to the pleas of the villagers. Pleas for a good harvest, pleas meaning P-L-E-A-S, pleas, requests for a good harvest, maybe for a good bride for your son, maybe for a healthy baby, maybe not for an attack coming. And so these Jangsung would have bowls of rice placed at their feet for offerings to please them. So that's one thing you could see there. Or you could watch a traditional wedding ceremony, just a couple of things in the folk museum that you might see. So this is something you wouldn't go to see as a tourist, but there is a museum now that they opened in 2010. And this is called the Blue House, or Cheongwa-dae, and this is the residence of the Korean president. So in Korea, the president has the power and the prime minister is more of a figurehead duty, not to belittle that at all. But anyway, the president has the power. The Blue House up against the mountain, looking perfectly tranquil and very, very pretty. And here, for instance, if the president of Korea were to be receiving a VIP, you would have the guards in the old costume lining up with the red carpet treatment. So this same building was the site of something very, very different in the 1970s. There was an attack on the Blue House. Again, this DMZ, I had said that now it's very heavily fortified and mined, but it became so during the years. So I think in the 70s, this was, some South Koreans spotted some woodcutters working in the DMZ, and it turned out that they were North Korean soldiers in disguise, and their mission was to attack the Blue House. Well, because they were found out ahead of time, there was a skirmish, but they were hunted down and the attack was unsuccessful. But this was obviously enough to rattle Seoul and Korea and the president, and it occurred during the time of this gentleman whose name was Park Chung-hee. Park Chung-hee was part of a military coup in 1961, and then in 1971 or 72, he became the dictator of Korea, and he declared martial law. He was very repressive. For instance, he would use an incident like that to clamp down even further on civil liberties, but he also did a great deal to bring Korea into the modern age and to get it on its feet towards becoming the economic powerhouse that it is today. So he has a very mixed legacy. He did survive 2 assassination attempts by North Korea, but ironically enough, he was assassinated in 1979 in a safe house in Seoul by someone who was ostensibly his friend, the head of the then South Korean CIA, so Park Chung-hee. In 2012, a museum and a library was opened in his honor. Some call him the greatest president of all time, simply because of this rapid explosion of growth, but he's heavily criticized for the way that he was very cruel to the population. So this is Park Chung-hee. And then in 2013, a year after his library opened, this is his daughter, Park Geun-hye, she ran for the presidency, and she ran on the legacy of her father. She was the candidate for the Conservative Party in Korea, and she won. She was very successful, but unfortunately, a couple of years after that, she was convicted of influence peddling, and she's currently serving out a prison sentence in Seoul. So she's not the president. She had a very, very rapid, very unfortunate, very sad fall from grace. So Park Geun-hye, the Conservative Party, and the current president, I should pay tribute. This is Moon Jae-in. He is of the Liberal Party. So if you've seen pictures or talk over the last couple of years of South Korea trying to get together with North Korea, there was also actually a picture of President Moon with the dictator of North Korea in that peace village where they had those blue buildings. By the way, I should have told you at the beginning that in Korea, the family name goes first. So this gentleman, Moon Jae-in, his name for us would be Jae-in Moon, although we would never refer to him as such. And the North Korean dictator, Kim Jong-un is his first name. And Kim is the legacy, the dynasty, the Kim. This is the grandson of the Kim who founded the North Korean dynasty. So Moon Jae-in, the current president of South Korea. So you might want to debate about what time you'd like to come and visit Korea, what time of year. So you could consider coming in the spring because the cherry blossoms are so beautiful. They start obviously in the south of the country and work their way further north. I thought this was such a pretty picture, this couple with these see-through umbrellas here just dancing under the cherry blossoms. And here you have, this is quite artistic here, these little parasols are set up and the people are walking on either side looking, and the cherry blossoms are hanging over this art display. It's so pretty with all of its colors. So you might decide to come at cherry blossom time. You might decide to come when there is the Buddha's birthday celebration, which is a movable date, but which is always during the month of May. This particular lantern parade that takes place at that time is just about the largest in the world and is 1,200 years old. And a couple of years ago, TripAdvisor magazine said that this is something that you have to add to your list if you're going to be traveling in Asia at all. So this is a lantern parade that is fascinating to go and watch as it snakes through the streets. And it's about a mile long. Here you have a float with the lotus blossom, as I understand the lotus blossom being symbolic of Buddhism and meaning that we all possess the ability to become enlightened. So as far as statistics go in religion, about 56% of South Koreans will say they do not practice a religion. And then of the remaining, it'll be 20% Protestant, 15% Buddhist, and 8% Catholic. And Korea entered the 20th century with Christianity firmly in place. The missionaries had done their job. They didn't always have an easy time, but Christianity stayed. And actually, at the end of the Korean War, before the border closed, about 1 million Christians fled from North Korea down to the south before the border closed. So Buddha's birthday, so probably a temple in the middle of the city somewhere being decorated, looking very festive, and these girls having fun with the lotus blossom, maybe a tiny little electric battery to illuminate them there. And again, the inside of a temple, and these decorations start, you've got to put them up days ahead of time to get all this done. So there's a lot of, it's fun to watch. And here you have lanterns being made for if you're a foreigner or a child, or you can just stand and watch the whole thing. So that would be Buddha's birthday. This would be a sound and light show in the capital city. This is the Garden of the Morning Calm, which is not a one-time event. This is a location just outside the city that you can go and watch this or just see these gardens that are illuminated, the Garden of the Morning Calm. And then there are festivals, just like we have festivals. This is one of the more drastic ones. It might not speak to everybody. This is the Boryung Mud Festival, where you cannot have any hesitations to get down and get dirty, obviously, from just watching that there. Or something a little more on the beautiful side, the Butterfly Festival in Hampyeong. The Tomato Festival is another one where it's going to be obviously in warm weather because you're going to get all mucked up if you take part in it, but it's very, very popular. And again, to each his own, right? And then this is a page from a brochure on the Army Post for a Rice Cultural Festival, and where they were trying to persuade the military families to sign up and get off the post and see something of Korea. So this is the Mask Festival. I had mentioned at the beginning that the masks are very popular souvenirs. The mask in olden days was very sacred and could represent the gods, and it was always kept a certain distance from people's homes. At the same time, it has a lot of meaning if it's painted. Depending on the color of the mask, the wearer could be male or female, or old or young, or have a certain personality. If somebody was duplicitous, the mask might have two different colors. And Andong is the city that hosts this mask festival every year. I think these modern masks were obviously, I think, made by tourists. Those aren't the old-fashioned masks, but it's fun to see what they've done, and they're all very elaborate looking. And then when the masks are used for dancing, in the old days, the villagers who say they wanted to advocate for lesser taxes, or they weren't happy about something, so the mask offered a degree of anonymity when they would do these dances for the Yongban, for the aristocratic class. They were safe. Nobody could really see who they were. And again, this is being put on at the festival for the tourists in Andong. And this is another example of the mask. And sometimes, like on the right, the Korean masks can be very, very almost like that stumpy nose and those exaggerated features. That's just the way they developed. And again, as they're very popular in the souvenir shops, everything from a mask itself in all different sizes, even to a refrigerator magnet or something like that. So you can't go anywhere without talking about food in the world, right? That's half the fun. And we actually have some really great Korean restaurants in our area. We're fortunate. I know Ann Arbor has a couple just because of the big student population, but there are others. And I think the outstanding feature about the Korean cuisine is always these multitudinous side dishes that are put in front of you when you order something. There's no end, and they're all supposed to be good for you. So even if you're not quite sure what you're trying, you could always take a tiny test and see what you think, and just risk it, just go for it, unless you just can't. This is my mom. I'll tell you in a minute what she was doing in Korea. She's at a luncheon here trying to decide what she should eat next. And here I am, and that's the reason why she was there. I'm with four other women here. One of my favorite programs to participate in was called Hello Friends, and it was sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce. So ladies of the American Women's Club could sign up to go to an elementary school and talk English to the children. That would be from grades like very, very young up until grade 5. Granted, if the child is very young, you're basically just doing head, shoulders, knees, and toes, or the hokey pokey, whereas already in the 5th class, they would have quite a bit of vocabulary, but they just don't get enough speaking practice. So we would do that in the morning and off to some part of the country. We always had an interpreter with us. Here's our interpreter. And then we would have a delicious lunch. And then we would head back to Seoul. We would do some sightseeing also. But look at this. Here we are, 5 women. And by the way, we're sitting on the floor here. In Seoul, you'll pretty much be always sitting on chairs and in the larger cities, but you might be out in the countryside and find a restaurant where you're still sitting on the floor. But look at the multitudes of dishes here. This is just for the 5 of us here. So where do you even start? How do you even decide? It's a lot of fun, and it's not overwhelming. It's just impressive and fun. So some of the more popular dishes, I had mentioned the kimchi jars that are put in the ground in the old days for refrigeration. This is the very popular kimchi. I think it's also an acquired taste. I didn't care for it very much when I first went there, but now I like it. So it's the elongated cabbage. And then I went to 2 kimchi making sessions where we were told to separate the leaves and put the paprika paste on. And depending what part of the country you're in, like if you were right on the sea coast, you might find tiny bits of chopped seafood in the paprika paste. If you're in an area where they grow a lot of garlic, you might find garlic in it. And then you put it on and you're supposed to hold it in your arms and overlap, sort of swaddle the leaves over each other as if you were swaddling a baby. So this is the kimchi. Koreans have 2 refrigerators in their kitchen, a regular stand-up refrigerator like you and I do, and then one that opens where the top opens up, and that's where the kimchi is kept. It's at a different temperature from your other refrigerator, and also it has a very strong smell. So there will be 2 refrigerators. And most Korean women don't really care to make kimchi anymore, as in the old days, the tradition. They prefer to buy the kimchi in the store. This is a really easy one for foreigners, japchae. These would be the glass noodles with vegetables and some soy sauce and the sprinkling of sesame seed, always very popular. You can also have little bits of seafood if you so choose in there. And bibimbap, which is my personal favorite. So bop means rice in Korean, and bibim means to stir. So bibimbap is literally stirred rice. Underneath all of this, there is rice, and you can have it also vegetarian without the meat that you see there. And it has to be served in a very, very sizzling ceramic bowl, and sizzling enough so that when you stir everything up, that egg that you see in the middle will cook along the way. And then you can either eat it like that, or you can douse it with a hefty dose of red pepper sauce. So bibimbap, stirred rice. Pajun, the Korean pancake, this one with some long green scallions cooked into it and a sauce. Dukbogi, which is a very popular street food. They're the rice cakes with a hot, spicy sauce. And kimbap, bap again meaning rice, and kim meaning the seaweed. So kind of a sushi-like. You put out the seaweed, put down the rice, and your ingredients, you roll it up and chop it up. Kimbap, very popular. So an American kid might have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in the lunchbox, and a Korean kid would have little pieces of kimbap for lunch or for a snack. And bulgogi, literally fire meat, and the very popular Korean barbecue that has taken on in the United States here. This one I included just because after the movie Parasite won the Oscar, and just very briefly, the movie is about the very stark contrast between very wealthy and very poor in Korean society. And this dish pictures it completely because these noodles are what everybody eats, and they're in a spicy seafood broth. But in the movie, the wife, the mother of the family that's very wealthy, calls her maid. She's on the way home. She says, "I want you to fix this for me." And of course, being who they are, the maid is putting the finest cut of beef chunks. So it's the dramatic contrast between what the very poor would eat, the noodles, but yet this family has it with these meat chunks. And I've been told there's a 1-star Michelin restaurant in New York City, Korean restaurant, when things get back to normal and up and running. And they, after Parasite won the Oscars, they added this dish to their menu as a feature. So here we are back to the market again, just looking and deciding. It's just endless variety of what we might want to order and eat, or just look. You don't have to order. Our younger daughter was very young when we moved there, and we're trying to decide what we should get. This is something we could never bring ourselves to taste. These are boiled silkworm pupa. You find at outdoor markets, outdoor parks, at an outdoor circus, just anywhere. They're in little Dixie cups. They come with a toothpick, and they're a very popular snack. And when I researched this, I found out that they were introduced in the early 60s. Remember, Korea was very, very poor in the early 60s, and they are very protein rich. So the Organization of Economic Development introduced this as a way to get protein, and they're still popular today. Nowadays, these pupa come from China, and even the silk you saw in my handbook at the beginning, I said it was made of silk, that is also imported from China. But anyway, very popular snack. I just can't testify to it. You have to forgive me on that one. So another place where I really liked to go or to take visitors was to the fisheries wholesale market. This is a market that is going 24 hours a day. They auction off all the bounty and the treasures and the riches of the sea, of course, the peninsula, at about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I was never there for one of these auctions, but I did enjoy visiting. And you're looking down here on all the different booths where you have the name of the vendor up here. And then, of course, whatever he or she is selling. And then upstairs, there will be dried fish, and there are also restaurants. So you can literally pick your fish up out down here and take it upstairs and have it prepared, and you can have a meal up there. And this is more of a close up here. You're told not really to wear good shoes because the floors could be wet. And looking down again on the whole operation. It's if you like any kind of shellfish or fish, it's very entertaining. If you really brought the wrong kind of shoes, you can go upstairs and you can buy a pair of boots that you can then wear while you're walking around. And this would be on the right, salmon, and on the left, just about some of the most giant shrimp you've ever seen. These are dried fish to be used as ornamental in ceremonies. And here you have the octopus, which is, when we think of octopus or calamari on a menu, we think of it as being breaded and usually deep fried. And in Korea, it's not eaten that way. It is eaten without the breading. And here's a little guy who is just clinging. It looks like he's clinging to life. He's literally being steamed in the pot. Pretty soon he's going to have to give up. But you can see his suction cups there. And the squid or the octopus is served with sesame seed oil and sesame seeds. The oil simply because you don't want those suction cups sticking in your throat. That would not be good at all. And it doesn't, look really appetizing. But again, every culture has its special foods. We have some foods in the US that foreigners think, how can they eat that? So here it is with a sprinkling of sesame seed. And this is, again, our younger daughter, Caroline. We were invited to a dinner where it was the kind of dinner where you cannot say no to your host, and you want to at least show that you're going to try. So she has very tentatively bit off about 1 inch of a tentacle there, and she's dealing with that right now. This was one of my Hello Friends classes where I said we would go to the schools and the little children would be so happy to see us. And even if they can't say anything, they would say, hello, hello. And they always wanted to have their picture taken at the end. So it was just one of my absolute favorite things to do. I was really fortunate that the American Chamber sponsored this activity. So let's talk about business for just a minute. You probably recognize some of the names here. You have LG, Samsung, Hyundai. Those are the really biggies. These are what is called chaebol in South Korea. A chaebol is a very major conglomerate with strong family ties and also very strong ties to the government. These chaebol, these family-oriented businesses, were started during the time when Park Chung-hee was the dictator. And they were modeled on a system in Japan called zaibatsu, but in Japan, they would be financially independent. In Korea, they couldn't be financially independent because Park Chung-hee had nationalized all the banks. So he could decide which industry he wanted to promote, and he could do that artificially if he so chose. So at one time, there was an economic downturn, and they really suffered because they had been propped up. But that's in the past. So these are the really biggies, the ones in Korea. Korea is trying to get down to say that, the middle section of the business world is also good, but these are really the movers and shakers. And as far as energy goes, Korea is really a very energy poor nation, which makes it even more remarkable with its economic success. It has no known oil reserves, and it's the second largest importer of liquefied natural gas in the world. It does get some energy from conventional thermal power and has some nuclear energy, although the current president has said he's going to he's going to try and get rid of that by a certain date. He's made a promise to his country. So I said that it was the 13th largest economy in the world. It's our 7th largest trading partner. Again, this country, the size of Indiana, and I have my statistics here. It's our 7th largest export market, 5th largest agricultural market for United States, 6th largest high-tech market. And in terms of the tourism dollars coming into the US, it's the 5th largest source. Can you imagine the 5th largest source? That's a lot of money coming into the United States from South Korea. So kudos to them. So just getting out of the city completely, you might choose to visit a green tea plantation and have a cup of tea. And this is some green tea jelly here. And your eyes just taking in this tranquil green after being in that concrete jungle of high rises is very, very refreshing. So this would be the Bosong tea plantation. You can watch a movie on how the leaves are harvested. And once again, for the tourist trade, you can see the women in hanbok performing that ancient tea ceremony for you. You could choose to go to a bamboo garden. This particular one is called Damyang, and it says that a garden without bamboo is like a day without sunshine. And again, not just for purposes of tourism and getting away from the big city, but if you think back, again, Korea being poor, being agrarian, some species have seeds that can be eaten, and then the tender young shoots can be cooked and eaten as vegetables. The older parts can be given as fodder to the animals, and then the stalks themselves, anything from furniture to fishing poles to platforms, you name it. So very, very multi-use. And that was the bamboo garden. And this is over on the East Coast. This is another one of their national parks, Soransan. Again, that's san meaning mountain. We were very fortunate. This is a postcard package that I bought. And again, just that stunning natural beauty. We were fortunate to camp twice in Soraksan with our son, who was a Boy Scout on the Army post there, and just beautiful, beautiful hikes and walkways through the national parks of Korea. Then a very interesting oddity over on the East Coast. We were amazed that this museum exists there. It's called the Edison Chamsori Light and Sound Museum. No one there, Thomas Edison had absolutely nothing to do with Korea. He never visited Korea, but there is someone there who is an Edison fan and who has amassed the third largest collection in the world of Edison paraphernalia. Very entertaining and a real piece of trivia. And this would be a phonograph collection that you can see there. And we were so fascinated by that. And then again, 2 traditional holidays in Korea. Again, the Koreans that nowadays would probably not be dressed like this, but this could also be for tourists. This could be showing their Chuseok, their Thanksgiving, which is usually in September. It's a lunar holiday, so it depends upon the moon. But Chuseok is very, very high holiday where all the families come together, and you might not want to travel by car during Chuseok because you might be sitting in this kind of traffic. Now, having said that, it's not really fair because trying to get out of Seoul on any given weekend might look like this because the traffic is so heavy. But you would be well advised if you're touring, you could take a bus. The buses have their own special lane here, and then you can read and sit back and relax. So Chuseok is the Korean harvest celebration, and then Korea follows also our calendar for the modern world, but the Lunar New Year. They celebrate the Lunar New Year, and they have the 12 signs, like we have our 12 zodiac signs. And maybe some of you are familiar from restaurants. You'll see these are similar to the Chinese signs of the zodiac. And depending on what year you're in, they always find something complimentary to say about the animal. My husband and I were invited to a dinner of the Korean American Business Council when we were ushering in the year of the rat. And then the speaker told us that the rat is extremely intelligent and very industrious, and all these positive attributes were given to the rat, which we don't normally think in every day. But so this is the Lunar New Year. This is another time when families travel to be together. So very, very heavy traffic. This is the site I had mentioned at the beginning, Pyeongchang, where the 2018 Winter Olympics were held. Korea was very proud of its success. It was already a ski resort, so they really just had to develop it further. And energy conscious as always, the stadium did not have a roof. I don't know if you remember back to seeing any of those parades. Here you've got down here, Pyeongchang 2018. The athletes would be marching here. You could see their breath on the air. There was Vice President Pence at those games. You could see his breath on the air. And there was also the sister of Kim Jong-un, who was there in a fur coat. So just very, very little heating. And again, an Olympic site that is not like so many destined to become a white elephant, still in use today. And at the time of the games, they implemented a high-speed rail train from Seoul, so you can get there within 2 hours over to Pyeongchang. The monasteries, the Buddhist monasteries, again, a small percentage of the population practicing Buddhism, but still the monasteries all up in the mountains and very, very picturesque, very isolated, very prone to meditation, to silence. And something really interesting happened in 2002 when Korea co-hosted the Olympics, the World Cup soccer games with Japan. And one order of monks had the idea that they would open their monasteries to people who wanted to stay overnight. So they did this, and it was actually a big success. Those World Cup soccer games only lasted about 30 days, and yet they probably had about 1,000 foreigners and 10,000 Koreans take part in what has become known as the Temple Stay program. And UNESCO has designated this as a cultural site, cultural mixed with tourism program. The Temple Stay program is very popular now. I think you book online and then you go and you stay there for a night. And I have been told, I didn't do it, but you have to be ready to get up at 3 or 4 in the morning and pray with the monks. And you learn to be thankful for every single rice given you in your bowl for your food. And then there are various activities in which you can take part. So these temples all have the same colors, and here you see Buddhas over here, and these are again places you can see. You can come up here as far as here and just kneel down, and I believe these are prayer petitions hanging from the ceiling here in the temples. So we're almost at the end, but we're way at the southern part of the country. And I just want to point out these houses. This is in a town called Namhae. And if you look more closely at these houses, you will see that they actually look like something that you would see in Germany. And sure enough, go back to the 1960s, Korea is very, very poor. And let's go back even further in time. I believe it was 1883. The Kingdom of Prussia, it wasn't Germany yet, the Kingdom of Prussia signed a diplomatic treaty with the Chosen dynasty. And that treaty has stayed in force through all the wars and the history and whoever was in charge of the country. In fact, when we were there in, well, it wasn't, anyway, it doesn't matter when, they were celebrating the 125th anniversary. And the German ambassador had a big reception, and he had a massive 125 made out of ice. And it was very, very, a very joyous occasion. So the 1960s, you have Korea struggling, really, really poor. You have Germany just kicking in the Marshall Program, and Germany is getting on its feet. Its engine is starting to roar. And one of the things that it needs are coal miners, because if you go up the Rhine River north of Cologne and Dusseldorf, you come to the Ruhr area. And so the two countries devised a program whereby Korean men were sent to Germany to work in the coal mines. And this program went on, I believe, for about 14 years. And the hard cash that they earned came back to their country and helped power that engine for Korea to get it up and running. There were also some Korean women who went over and worked as nurses. So when they came back, they built some of these houses here, and it's popularly known as the German Village. Tourists go there and they expect to see Germans. Well, obviously, if these men and women were working in Germany in the 60s and 70s, there are probably not going to be very many of them alive anymore, but it's still popularly known as the German Village, and people like to go and take a look at it. And this next one is very stereotypical. You know, these Korean women here are wearing dirndls. You wouldn't really even see this in Germany, maybe at Oktoberfest, but obviously Germans are not walking around looking like this. But I think they're having fun here. Maybe they are celebrating an Oktoberfest or just the heritage, the idea of the two countries still with a very close relationship today. And so they're showing off their clothing there. And then a tribute to Busan, the second largest city down on the southern coast. Again down here would be Busan right here. I showed you Seoul. I showed you Incheon where we landed. This would be Pyeongchang where the Olympic Games were held. And at the very end, we're going to go down to Jeju Island, which is a volcanic island. And it's sometimes referred to as the Hawaii of Korea. And back before, now Korean couples it's still fairly affluent. You can kind of choose if you want to go on your honeymoon just about anywhere. But not everybody in the population. But the point is that this was a very popular honeymoon destination, Jeju Island, and still is a very popular tourist destination because it has more of a tropical atmosphere than the peninsula itself does. And I pay tribute at the very end to these women here who have been a tradition on Jeju Island. And sadly, they are dying out because their daughters don't want to continue, but they go down and they harvest all the riches of the sea. And they're very famous. They have these baskets here that they float and then they go down. They have been known to hold their breath for up to 2.5 minutes underwater. American scientists came to study them and their lung capacity. And it's just a wonderful tradition. So even though they are dying out in numbers, there is a museum on the island honoring them. And that's always worth a visit. So I think, and there I am once more in my handbook saying, I hope that you liked my show. this is Korea. I hope you learned something, and I really thank you. I know it's a long show, but I thank you for your attention, and I am open to questions, comments, anything you care to give me right now. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariya. That was fantastic. I always love to see your photos, and such a treat to hear all the stories behind everything. I'm watching to see if anyone's typing any questions into the comment box or on Facebook. We'll give a second for that to happen.
Hopefully they're not all overwhelmed. So
right. Right. I loved it. I just love, seeing all those photos.
It's a country of contrasts for sure, especially if you go back, within the last 50 years and everything that's happened. It's amazing.
Yeah, so much to learn.
I was looking for my piece of paper because sometimes people ask about Korean restaurants and I can't find my piece of paper, but I know there's one in Southfield, and I know there are a couple of in Ann Arbor. And
there's one in Canton now. I live in
really?
Canton.
Is there?
Yeah, really? It's at Ford and Canton Center on the north west corner. It's called Kimchi, actually.
Well, that'll be easy to remember. Thank you for telling me.
Yeah, It's fairly new. It's been maybe a year.
We'll have to try it.
Yeah, it's good. I have been there. Yes, Joe in the comments says kimchi is the restaurant.
Thank you, Joe. I'm planning on trying it out. Thank you.
Yeah, and someone else said, thank you to Mariya for a thorough history of South Korea, where my dad fought with the Army. Oop, it popped me off here. Where my dad fought with the U.S. Army in the 50s, and my good friend is from. I hope to visit her there one day and see all these sights.
I hope you get there also. So
yeah, and Joe says the food is good. Kimchi.
I don't mean to be disloyal to Delta Airlines because I do travel with them a lot. But when I went exactly a year ago, I was planning on flying with Delta, and then we were kind of just doing some screen surfing. And so Delta had a price. So we have a nonstop from Detroit to Seoul for $1,300 something. But I did find that if I took Air Canada and I went Detroit, Toronto, and Toronto was a really easy transfer, Seoul, it was $900 something. So it was $400 cheaper. So it does pay to look around. I mean, not everybody's going to jump on a flight right away, and not in these troubled times anyway.
Sure.
But I hope you get there. I hope you get there.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Okay, some people are saying, love the program. Thank you very much. Doesn't look like there's any questions though. Just a reminder that the video will be on our Facebook profile and our YouTube channel for a week or so. If you want to share it with anyone, go ahead and share it on Facebook or send them to our YouTube channel to see it there. Okay, thanks so much, everyone, for attending. Oh, there is a question. When and how long were you there?
We were there for 4 years. We were there from August of 2006 until July of 2010. So 4 very, very enriching years, meeting the U.S. Army and Korea and Asia at the same time. It was fascinating. It was great. Yeah, it's really great.
Action-packed couple of years, eh?
Yes, it's true. Yeah, it was.
Cool. His son worked there for 2 years, he says.
Oh, okay. Did his son like it?
Let's see if he has an answer.
Yeah.
He loved it.
Great.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you again so much. I just always love these programs. Hopefully we will be able to have some of your other ones again in the winter or the spring, maybe.
Wonderful. I'm up for it. Thank you, Holly. Thank you so much.
And